Some people go through their whole lives without ever facing their deepest demons. But what if one day you were forced to confront the worst trauma of your life and had the chance to turn pain into compassion? Now, imagine forgiving the man who killed your brother, not out of obligation, not for religious reasons, but because it's the only way you can breathe again. Sounds crazy, right? But that's exactly what Rachel did. And what happened next wasn't just shocking, it was transformative. Because her story isn't just about grief, it's about courage. About walking through hell with your head held high and still choosing not to become part of it. Before we continue, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell. Here you'll find real stories that touch your heart and help you see the world through a different lens. And if this story moves you in any way, share it with someone who needs to hear about forgiveness. Rachel didn't know what to expect when she decided to visit Marcus. It was a cold morning, the kind that makes everything feel heavier. She walked through the prison gates with her heart pounding in her throat, each step defying everything her instincts screamed. I'm not ready for this, she thought. But she was already there. The visitation room was plain, with round tables and plastic chairs. Rachel sat down, waited. She was sweating. Then he walked in. Marcus, thinner than she remembered from the trial photos, eyes downcast, shoulders slumped. The world went silent. And then he said, I don't know where to begin. Neither did Rachel, but they were there. And that was everything. The conversation started tense. Harsh words, unanswered questions, deafening silences. Marcus shared more about his life. The abusive father, absent mother, years on the streets, addictions, fears, not as an excuse, but as context. And Rachel listened. Not because she agreed, but because she needed to understand. As he spoke, she saw his hands trembling, heard the quiver in his voice, and felt something strange. Compassion. For the first time, she wasn't just a victim. She was human. Wounded, yes, but alive, I meant. And that encounter, which once seemed impossible, ended with a hug. A timid hug, full of pain, but also full of something new. Release. If that moved you, get ready. What happened after that hug is an emotional landslide. Rachel's life would never be the same. In the days that followed, Rachel spiraled through intense emotions. She cried through the nights, battled nightmares, questioned everything. Close friends didn't understand. Some even pulled away. You forgave the guy who killed your brother. Are you crazy? But Rachel knew. It wasn't about Marcus. It was about her, about the weight she'd carried since the day of the murder. And now, that weight was beginning to lift. For the first time in years, she could breathe. She felt hunger again. She started riding her bike. Then she made another life-changing decision, to share her story. First at a support group, then in an article, and that article went viral. People from all over the world reached out. Others who had lost someone, others filled with hate, people desperate for hope. Rachel realized her story had become a bridge between pain and healing, between justice and empathy, between trauma and the possibility of moving forward. She was invited to speak at prisons, schools, community centers. Anywhere there was pain, she brought her voice, not as a hero, but as someone who chose not to drown, who chose to walk even with trembling knees. And it all began with a letter. Stay with me. What Marcus did next will give you chills and change everything you thought you knew about redemption. Marcus never thought he'd get a second chance. Since the day he was arrested, he believed his fate was sealed, to rot behind bars, consumed by guilt. But Rachel's visit shattered that belief. For the first time, he felt a flicker of humanity coming from beyond the prison walls. That gesture, that unexpected hug, planted a seed he didn't even know existed. The desire to change. In the months that followed, Marcus threw himself into rehabilitation programs within the prison. He began studying, writing, reflecting on all he had done. Not as a way to make up for the crime nothing could bring Daniel back, but to become someone better. Not for himself, but to honor the life he took. He began writing short texts. At first, they were simple outpourings. Then they became messages he read to younger inmates. He warned them about the false sense of power that violence brings. Slowly, something started to shift. Rachel and Marcus's story began to circulate among the prison population. Guards and staff started noticing his transformation. He wasn't the same angry, defiant young man. He had become a stabilizing presence, strange kind of mentor for others. When a restorative justice nonprofit learned about his journey, they decided to document it. A small film crew arrived. They captured his sessions, his letters, his remorse. And then they filmed the impossible Rachel and Marcus watching the premiere together, side by side. You already know this isn't just a story about forgiveness, it's about rebirth. But what Marcus did next? That's when everything really changed. With support from the nonprofit, Marcus finished high school behind bars. Then he enrolled in a distance learning program for social work. His goal to help kids like him, kids pushed to the margins of society. Meanwhile, Rachel was evolving too. She became involved in public policies around restorative justice, joined debates on violence, participated in national forums. She became a reference, a powerful voice, a woman who had every right to scream for vengeance, but chose to shout for hope instead. And that scream code. Picado. Schools started programs inspired by her and Marcus's story, teaching empathy, conflict resolution, and violence prevention. And then the unthinkable happened. Rachel and Marcus began speaking publicly together. In front of stunned audiences, they told their story without sugarcoating it. He spoke of guilt, sleepless nights, and the damage he caused. She spoke of grief, of her healing process, of the weight of forgiveness. The impact was undeniable. In every auditorium, there were tears, silence, transformation. The audience no longer saw just a victim and a killer. They saw two human beings trying to rebuild what had once been broken beyond repair. But the climax was still to come. A state legislator, deeply moved by their journey, proposed a new law. It would formalize a voluntary reconciliation program between victims and offenders, including psychological support and trained mediation. And who was called to help shape that proposal? Rachel and Marcus, same woman who once collapsed on the floor in anguish, now sat in policy meetings. And her brother's killer sat beside her. The passing of that law was symbolic. Not just because it marked a historic moment in the state, but because it exposed a truth society often avoids. The prison system doesn't heal. And justice without empathy is just punishment. Rachel and Marcus's story proved that when there's a genuine will to change, something extraordinary can rise from the ruins of tragedy. On the day the bill was signed into law, they were both there side by side, eyes steady, words clear. Rachel stood before the assembly and with a trembling but firm voice said, "Forgiveness isn't forgetting. It's remembering without letting it control you." Marcus followed, his eyes full of tears, adding, "I took a life. But with the time I have left, I try to honor the one I stole." The entire chamber rose in a standing ovation.
Ow.
What once seemed unthinkable had become real. The documentary, which until then had only circulated at small festivals, was picked up by a major global streaming platform. The response was immediate. Headlines, interviews, invitations to speak across continents. But Rachel never let the attention get to her head. She said it wasn't about fame or recognition. It was about opening doors so that other Rachels and other Marcuses around the world could find their own way forward. Marcus, still serving part of his sentence, was moved to a semi-open regime and allowed out for educational events. A privilege? Maybe, but one earned through tears, commitment, and relentless transformation. Every step outside those prison walls came with immense responsibility. And you think it stops there? Wait until you hear what Rachel did with her brother's old room. It's the kind of gesture that melts even the hardest hearts. Daniel's room had remained untouched for years, his clothes still folded, his guitar leaning against the wall. The air soaked in nostalgia. Rachel knew it was time to give that space new life. And from it, she created the Daniel Room, a small community center focused on emotional support for at-risk youth. Art classes, support circles, therapy sessions, writing workshops. All free, all funded through donations after the documentary's release. And Marcus, he helped too. He wrote motivational letters, prepared materials, and responded to messages sent by teens. He never set foot in that room, but his presence was everywhere. It was within that journey that Rachel had an unexpected meeting with Marcus's parents. The same parents who never showed up at trial, the same ones she quietly resented. They came to her, shaking. Marcus's mother cried and said, "I failed as a mother. But watching my son try to become someone better gives me strength to try to..." And in that moment, Rachel understood. Her forgiveness had echoed beyond Marcus. It was touching generations. People who had never let themselves feel. People who thought it was too late to change. It wasn't. Time passed. Marcus's sentence was reduced for good behavior, dedication, and community work. He was released after several years, but he didn't return to the world as the same man. He left with a mission. He opened a social project in a poor neighborhood, working with violence prevention and support for former inmates. Rachel stayed close. The two became lifelong friends, partners in a mission neither of them planned, but that life or fate placed in their hands. And together, they continued to spread their story. Not as an example of perfection, but as proof that even when everything seems broken, healing is still possible. And if this story touched your heart, share it. Someone on the other side of this screen might be carrying an invisible pain. And maybe what they need isn't advice or judgment, but simply to know that there is a way forward, that reconciliation exists, that forgiveness, no matter how unlikely it seems, is possible. Subscribe, turn on notifications, and stay with us. Because stories like this aren't just told, they're felt.